Now let's move to our next topic, which is anonymous object. The question is, what is anonymous object? In Java, for an object, if you are not holding the reference of that object, then that object is known as anonymous object. The question is why we are doing so? Why we are not holding the reference of an object? What is the advantage of it? Or if we are holding the reference of an object in Java, then what is that advantage of holding the reference of any object in Java? These are the questions that comes to our mind when we start discussing this topic, anonymous object. Let's try to understand them one by one by implementation. Again, I have a simple implementation. Class is employee holding ename, salary, and age properties. These values are getting initialized by this constructor. And if someone wants to change the values of these properties, can change it by calling this change data method later on. Okay. And print data is just printing the information or the properties that are there inside the object. Now, what we are doing, we are going with the regular approach, the normal traditional approach, where I'm creating employee object and initializing the values of the object at the time of object creation by using this constructor. Okay. And then I'm holding that object reference because this constructor is automatically returning the object reference. Let's say that reference is 1000. So I'm holding that reference. And then once I get that object reference, I can call any method on that object, and that method will be directly able to access the properties that are inside that object. So I'm printing the data here, ename, salary, and age. Let me run this first. So I'm getting the data here, right? Now let me change it. What I want to do, instead of using this approach, if I use anonymous object, then what will be the output in that case? What I am doing, I am creating the object, and the time of object creation, the values will get initialized by this constructor once again. I am not holding that reference of that object this time, and because I am not holding the reference, that is known as anonymous object. Means you are getting the reference here itself and you are not holding it, but at the time you are getting it, you are using that reference and calling print data method on it, and then it will print the data. So if I run this once again, you can see again I'm getting the same output. So in that way, if you see, we are not getting any difference. Either you are going with this approach where you are holding the reference and then you are using that reference to call print data method, or else if you are getting the reference directly and not holding it and directly calling the method on that retrieved reference, then also it is working fine. Means anonymous object is also doing the same thing for me. Okay. Then the question is, why we are not using all the time anonymous object? What will be the problem? What is the need of holding the object reference? Let's try to understand this. To explain you this, I am changing the scenario slightly. Okay. What I am doing, I am making this comment. Okay. And I am creating employee class object by using non-parameterized constructor, which is this one. This is simply going to print constructor invoke, and it is not going to initialize instance data members of my employee class. That means those will be there with default values, null, 0, 0.0 or 0. Okay. Now I want to initialize the values by calling change data method. Now if I am using anonymous object approach, in this case I'll get the object reference here, let's suppose 1000, and then I am calling change data method and passing the values there, and it is going to print, or it is going to assign these values ename, salary, and age to this object for which we are getting the object reference 1000 here, and that 1000 reference we are using to make changes in the values of that object. Right now if I want to print the values also, then for that reason I want to call another method, which is print data. How I can call that method? I need again reference, but this change data method is not returning any reference, so I have to again call print data method with object reference. If I again wants to access the object reference, I need to say new employee and I'll say print data. Then what is going to be happen? It is going to create another object with zero default values, right? And when you call print data, that print data is going to print the values of this another object, which is another reference, which could be, let's say, 2000. So when you print the data, you might be getting 0, 0.0 or default values for 2000 object reference, while you made changes for 1000 object reference. That's the problem. If I'm running this, you can see I am getting constructor invoke two times for both of the object, and I am getting these values for second objects only. So you can clearly see that I cannot access the values of first object. And that's the problem. When you are using anonymous object reference approach, in that case, you can only call one method only. If you want to call multiple methods, because you are not holding the reference of that object, you cannot make the call. Here you can see in this implementation, I was just printing the data. Till one method call, it is fine. But when you want to call multiple methods on the same object reference, you need to hold the reference. What you need to do? Here you have to create the object, then change, use that object reference, hold that object reference and call the method change data and then call the method print data on the same object reference, that is 1000. Now you will get exact output. That is the main need of normal approach of holding the object reference. So if you have that type of requirement where you want to use object only once, then you can go with anonymous object reference approach, where you don't need to declare the variable to hold the object reference. You don't need to unnecessarily use or define any memory for that. But if you want to call multiple methods on same object, then it is always better to hold the object reference and call the methods on that object reference multiple times.